Well, thank you, Gil, for that really generous intro. I appreciate it. Good afternoon. Welcome back post-lunch. Really happy to be here with you all today, to be in a room full of people who are obviously invested and don't need to be sold about the importance of after-school program. Don't know how many youth have held on, but there are also people in the room who have personal experiences with not just in childhood, but currently experiences in terms of how powerful after-school programs can be for development. Let's see, that's up. So in my presentation today, I'm going to be sharing with you some work, some products of the effort of my team. I also actually going back to the efforts of people during my graduate school years working with Reed. And we've been thinking about engagement in general, right? That's a space, one of the spaces I occupy. I'm interested in what are the factors and processes whereby which youth become engaged in after-school programs. And today I'm going to focus on a slice of that. I'm going to talk about the connections that we've been observing, some conclusions we've been making about the relationship between peer interactions and relationship and the process of engagement. See, I'm going to multitask here. Let go. Okay. You know, I really appreciated Jenny's contribution today, of many, of course, that talk about definitions and engagement. And I felt like it was a good starting place to spend a moment telling you about what I describe as engagement as I think about my work. Like Jenny, I know that engagement has been conceptualized as a multidimensional concept. Involves sort of cognitive components, behavioral components, affective components, and agree that it is not a single-dimensional component. And so I have that in my head, and also, though, I came across a definition that I use as a practical guide as I go about thinking about engagement in the youth program work, and this is actually from Maurice Weiss, and she says that, or said, engagement is not simply the motivation to be present in the program, it is also being actively involved in the cognitive and social endeavors that promote growth. And I like this definition, I've sort of held on to it because for me it does a nice job of coupling or highlighting the cognitive piece, the behavioral piece, and the interpersonal dimensions. And so that's been a guide, and thought I'd just put that out there. Over here. Okay. So why does engagement matter? Again, I'm thankful to the people who came before me that have essentially sort of made my case for me a little bit. So I'll just give my pitch. So when youth show up to program activities, when they learn about what a program has to offer, they put forward effort into accomplishing goals that were individually set, that were group set, and get feedback. Could be that it went really awesome, could be that it didn't go so well, that's fine. But for me, this is where the learning takes place, right? This is where the developmental task of adolescence, of childhood, this is where it takes place, right? By really, I think Charles did a really energetic presentation of that, is when you really get into the nitty-gritty of the work, you learn about how to get along with your peers, you learn about how to pick up yourself off the floor when things don't go that well, and that is, for me, engagement in the activity, effort, concentration, practice, and I'm obviously building on the shoulders of people like Reed and other scholars that I'm going to talk about a little later on. So for me, that's why engagement matters. And as Jenny also said, while we sort of have that general understanding, participation is important, engagement is important, but how do we facilitate engagement? How do we foster engagement, right? And so the good news is that for some youth, engagement, happens right away or happens quickly, perhaps because some of those youth come into programs with a honed interest in an activity, or because they have a level of familiarity with the context that allows them to connect with the goals of the program, right? So there are those youth out there, which takes us to the bad news, if you will, is that some youth come into a program with pretty low interest levels, low background or familiarity, and so engagement has to be fostered. And that's not a negative and that's not a bad thing, right? Because this is sometimes where we're doing our work. Someone asked a question earlier today about the hard-to-reach youth. Oftentimes it's about letting them youth know about opportunities and bringing them to the door. And for those youth, part of the work is how to let them know what's possible and develop engagement. Luckily, some of the work we've done so far suggests that that is possible. Like, you don't have to walk into the door jazzed and ready to go. You can walk in sort of skeptical and not know, why am I here? But that you can become engaged. And so for this latter group, becoming engaged is a journey, it's a process that, again, my research team and I, and going back to graduate school days, have been trying to understand. So when you get there, and what do you start? What's the nature, the timing of the process? And then what are some general factors that promote the engagement? As has been mentioned before, I started work in this area during graduate school days at Illinois Urbana-Champaign, working with Reed. In my work since then, and a lot of it now, I've utilized mostly qualitative methodology in trying to get at the answers to some of my questions. I've really fell in love with qualitative methodology because I feel it's well suited for learning about an understudied area, again, nicely illustrated by Jenny earlier. Information that we get from qualitative methods, it's rich. We get it from interviews, from observation, and other data collection tools under this big umbrella. And it helps to ground our thinking about a concept, right, that is relatively new. And it also highlights important direction for additional research, which can be qualitative or quantitative. And so that's where I've sort of hung my hat methodologically. In short, my thinking on this topic is partly informed by time spent examining this data I've collected via qualitative methods. Across the work I've done in my career so far, I've been reading interviews and transcripts from over 130 youth, mainly in leadership and arts programs. During these interviews, we asked youth about, again, some of the questions I mentioned before. Why are you, how did you get into this program? How did you start? Over time, tell us about shifts in your motivation. Can you identify things that seem to be related to those shifts? Those kinds of questions. We asked about relationships. Tell us about the quality of your relationship with your peers. We asked generally about how their peers have interacted or impacted their experience in the program. And so from this information and from this standpoint, drawn some conclusions. And so what did we learn? I'm going to talk about a slice of some of the conclusions we've drawn. And just to be clear, so for this presentation, what you're going to be noticing is that I'm bringing together results from the data analysis I've done of those youth data, but also bridging or bringing into the mix theoretical work that talks about relationships and how relationships affect development and why we should care about friendships, for example. So, for example, Willard Hardup, Gary Ladd, Tom Berndt, are folks who've studied friendships and peer relationships as developmental settings. I've been informed by folks who fall more in the community side camp. It's David McMillan, David Chavez, who've talked about the impact of a sense of community on actions of group members, right? And it'll become clear how some of these ideas and scholars are relevant for the conclusions I've drawn. But in a nutshell, a key theme you're going to be hearing about is the power of friendships, is the power of bonds, right? We're talking about the impact of peer interactions, peer relationships on the engagement process. For me, a starting point for thinking about the process involves the fact that the after school, for many youth, is another social arena for teens, right? So teens join programs often weighing considerations about how do they fit in, whether they be welcomed or rejected, all those things. Thus, the interpersonal interactions that are warm, inviting, in short, welcoming, are really critical for reassuring newcomers to the program that the space is safe and worth exploring. So again, think of that youth who's sort of skeptical about, yes, I see this flyer, there's this program going on, but why should I show up? In the end, I talk about youth, or I discuss the case for youth who have had sort of negative experiences in these space, right? But for now, stage one, what I want you to be thinking about is that the data suggests that a key early experience in a youth activity is this sense of feeling welcomed. And I'll show you some examples of how youth talk about this in a minute. And what the data suggests, after they have that feeling of welcomed, or feeling welcomed, is that they move through what I'm calling the next door, or the next phase, into a phase that involves interacting with their peer members. So this is via planning, implementing projects that they're working on, going to fun events, right? And it's during these interactions that sort of come after you decide to come back for the second time that close interpersonal bonds are forming, right? After that exposure to each other. As a group, they develop a sense of being a family. It's a consistent theme that come up. Bart Hirsch should be familiar with that. People talking about programs being like another home, right? But there's a very consistent theme about, we're a family. And so indeed, across the youth that I've looked at, the data I've looked at, a lot of them, most of them reflect the story of developing a meaningful relationship with their peers. Friendships, right? And so maybe contrast friendship with acquaintances, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about why friendships are important. And so at the next stage, these interactions, they continue, right? So if you're with me, you enter into the door, you say, I'm coming back, I'm going to interact, maybe join a couple of projects. That interaction, you get to know your peers better, you develop bonds, and then you say, okay, I'm going to keep going forward, right? And so these interactions now, after the bonds I've developed, are sort of enhanced. And a key piece is that, as Reed has written in one of his pieces, is that motivation and sustained engagement is constantly under threat, right? From what? From bad days at home or at school, from projects that flopped or didn't go so well, or from interpersonal challenges, right? So on a typical day, you wake up in the morning and there's lots of things that are not going so well that you're not really jazzed about going to work and that's school, right? So constantly under threat. And so what I'm proposing is that the magic, right, where part of our theme is the magic of youth programs, the magic that underlines the outcomes. The magic of engagement start to occur in part because of affordances that are made possible by the friendships youth have developed, right? So the affordances of friendship operate such that youth respond adaptively to interpersonal challenge. So versus being in a context when you don't know each other, you're not invested in each other's well-being, when you have issues, rifts, disagreements, the affordances friendships offer help you to work through that. Affordances of friendships operate such that there's a positive climate in youth programs that helps smooth the passing through those rough days when you really don't feel like it, right? So you're in a youth activism program, which is where I'm spending a lot of my time recently. You have a big door-knocking campaign going on. It's snowing in Boston. It's cold. A bad day at school. You're just not feeling it, really. But the work has to be done. And so you go to the program, and a bunch of smiling faces, people, hailing you and saying, hey, what's up? It's going to be okay, right? That is, again, sort of getting beyond sort of those things that are going to be pulling you down motivationally and impact your engagement with the work. Lastly, the affordance of friendships operates such that youth receive encouragement when self-doubt creeps in after a project flops, right? So many of the programs we worked on very project-oriented. Skills in the most of the programs, youth have a lot of leeway to set the stage, and they go at the pace that they're comfortable with. They set goals that they have a lot of input in deciding, and part of that sort of independence or autonomy is that they're going to fail sometimes, or they're going to have hiccups, and so for youth to have a supportive context or have friends that can shore them up when that self-doubt creeps in is really, I think, part of the magic that is, part of the engagement story. Drawing on this idea of sense of community. So again, the backstory is I'm sitting and I'm reading these interviews, and this recurrent theme of we're a family. It's about the relationships we have. It's about the fact that we're a sense of community. And I'm thinking, okay, so what is the relationship between sense of community and showing up every day and really working hard, right? These are some of the questions that are in my head. And so when I came across the Macmillan and Chavez's work that offered some insight into the power of a sense of community, and some of the highlights is that when you've developed a sense of community, when you acknowledge that you're part of a family, there's accountability, right? And so you said you're going to do this piece of the project, you need to kind of follow through, right? A sense of community works such that youth have influence over each other. So it matters to you that your peers think that you're holding up your end, right? Your family members. A sense of community works such that there's emotional safety, right? You feel as if that you can bring things and you can have bad days and still be okay. And that comes from building this sense of community, right? So again, it's the idea that peer interactions, relationships that are formed are really sort of piece of the platform that makes making the work happen, right? That is the key thing we're thinking about. So the next few slides, which I'll just highlight, I thought I'll just give you a taste or a feel of how the youth languages, like how are they talking about these things. Now, in the interest of time, I will just paraphrase or bring your attention to the key pieces. So this is a youth who's talking about feeling welcomed. So this person said, I remembered when I first started, like the icebreakers and being a new person, I was worried about whether these people would like me or not. And at that first meeting, we played a bunch of games, probably much like the one very informed by Stanley's work, and I really enjoyed it, and I've been there since, right? That's huge. Another way a youth talked about it, they really welcomed me in. It's like I'm in other groups, and I come in and I'm sitting alone. With here, people said, okay, why don't you come on over? What's your name? How old are you? What school do you go to? They really welcomed me in. And I saw that again, I see that again across the programs that we have worked in. And another piece of the bonds is, again, we're asking youth about the importance of relationships. So one youth talked about, I feel like I knew them more, I could share my opinions more. I'm not the type of person that would just go and give my ideas in front of people when I don't know them, because I'm super shy. So bonding with them really helped me. And the point I want to underscore here is that for many of the programs, right, is the work really involves sharing your ideas. So in a youth-led program, it's like, okay, you're all going to come together and decide what you want to do this semester. And for that philosophy or model to really work, youth have to, wake up a little bit, better get engaged and share their ideas. Throw things out there. It's going to get, either accepted or tossed. But part of the work, again, other people have talked about it really well, is really reflecting on what interests me, what would be cool, right, versus sort of very passive stance. So this is why I feel when they talk about the fact that the bonds, feeling comfortable, feeling like I belong here, helps me do that, right, versus being worried that I'm going to be judged, I'm going to be criticized. Really important for getting the work done, if that is a piece of the work. Another person talked about, this is sort of the more working through difficulties, interpersonal difficulties. So again, picture a youth programs when we spend time in a big room, not as big as this, but 20 or so youth working together. They're bound to be disagreements. This youth talked about, these are people I can relate to, all people who have nice attitudes, nice personalities. I work around them without feeling like, mad, or they don't get me angry. So again, what I'm thinking about here is that youth bonds, right, developing friendships, really high quality relationships, afford this attitude of, we're going to work things out. People have differences. And the next quote, which I won't spend too much time on, at the very end, she talks about we figure out a way to get what we want. We can compromise. And again, the idea is a contrast to a setting where people don't know each other. They haven't had time to get to see how like-minded they are. They haven't had time to really build that relationships, and that's a big difference. This is another slide that highlights the conflict resolution, the fact that bonds, relationships, and friendships facilitate, again, the greater likelihood of resolving conflict, which, why is that important? You need to get the work done. You got a big project going on. You can't be mad at half the people in the room. The work. It's about how does the work occur. And this is a model I won't spend so much time on. That is just another way to graphically represent some of these ideas and how I'm sort of processing them. So this idea where you start from a point of feeling welcomed, getting along, which is meaning you have a chance to interact. There's group bonding, the sense of feeling a sense of belonging, feeling like a family, and for this presentation, I've been talking a lot about this idea of affordances. Like, why does that matter? They talk a lot about the interpersonal piece, and as a researcher thinking about why do they come? Why do they work hard at what they do? And so I've been thinking about how that is a piece of the pie, but another piece is sort of what comes after that. And that facilitates engagement in the program work, in the activities. But I'm happy to talk more of that later. So I think I'm going to be all right on time because I'm close to conclusions. So what conclusions for today? Do peers promote or hinder the engagement process of getting into the work of the activity? And the work I've been doing suggests that for the most part, they promote engagement. They promote actively thinking of ideas, developing a plan, implementing, coming back to the plan when things don't go so well, right? So they promote the engagement process, not just showing up. And the bonds that they form with each other are part of that, sort of borrowing other people's terminology, they create sort of motivational conditions, right, for that the engagement happens on, that supports the engagement. So next steps, I think part of the work also involved, and so our keynote speaker this afternoon made me think again on these issues, is thinking about the influence or the relevance of youth identity as members of racial or ethnic minorities. So I'm thinking again of some of the youth who come to these programs come from, not the best circumstances. And I think someone mentioned, it could be Charles again, there's the school experience in short is not that great, right? And to this day, I remembered a youth in an interview said they had positive experiences, and the positive experience was just having the sense that they learned. I was like, that was so awesome because I learned that. I mean, many of us, I think, are interested in education and youth outcome. How powerful is that? Or maybe sad, if depending on the place you stand. Just in that youth program, as a teen, for the first time, having a really profound sense that you have some self-confidence, right? You can execute and use your talents to create product. And so I'm thinking about just how cultural factors, and this is racial and ethnic minorities, just one proxy for that. How is that at play when you enter the room, right? How is, for example, the fact that you've had negative learning experiences where you maybe for structural reasons you didn't have the chance to share your opinions or really practice developing your voice, and so it's not just the usual adolescence or peer angst about how will my teens perceive me, but you've had experiences where you've been put down, right? And so these are some of the angst that you're feeling. And so again, why I feel like the experiences of feeling emotionally safe, right? Having a certain quality of interactions that get you to the place where you feel like, well, I've had this past experiences, but people here are cool, right? I'm gonna put my foot out there and see what happens. I think those are interesting ways to interested in next question. So what is the magic? The magic is when what is magic? Magic is when something wonderful happens and you don't know how it happens. So someone pulls a quarter from behind your ear, that's awesome. How does that happen, right? And so I think while it's great to document the different ways that programs are magical, if we stop there, we're at risk for missing opportunities and exploring ways that there's lots of behind the scenes work at the level of the leaders, the people who plan activities to get youth to really build these relationships. And that is, I think, an important piece of the picture to keep as we go forward with the work. And that's all I have. Thank you very much for your attention.